Good afternoon, or almost good evening. My name is David Walker, and this is Srikanth Venkat. I'm from WorldPay, and Srikanth is from Hortonworks.
Hello, everyone.
Obviously, we are the people holding you up from the beer. You lot are the brave ones to find something to do in the last 45 minutes before beer. There's some good news about this. It's only a short presentation, normally. The bad news is that Srikanth and I are famous for going on and procrastinating, so you'll be here for about the next 4 hours. We've only done 150 slides. Skip that one, it's boring. But who's WorldPay? So we started working with Hortonworks 3 years ago, 1st of April 2015. And we're a payment processing company. These are our European figures. We've just merged with a company in the States called Vantiv. So you can effectively double all of these numbers. We process 43.5 million transactions a day. That's about 500 a second. 400,000 merchants. I didn't know, but 300 payment methods. So that's everything from smart mobiles in Kenya to credit cards to Bitcoin to you name it, we do it. I didn't realize that there were that many payment methods. 126 currencies. 146 countries, and we process 41.3% actually of all the non-cash transactions in the UK. That makes it a challenge. It has to be a secure cluster. And so we started at the very outset of the project, we said that security and regulatory compliance were going to be critical for what we did. We'd seen all this in the news. We'd seen hacks happening. We understood the danger. But the flip side was we also had to meet a bunch of standards. We have Data Protection Act, GDPRs coming along the way. We have something called the Payment Services Directive, which talks about the amount of fraud that we can let go through the system, which needs detailed analytics of the fraud rates, but also the behaviors of card. We have the payment card industry, PCI, data standards. And it doesn't really matter which industry you're in. There's going to be some level of data compliance and PII, data protection standards. It just happens that I've got a table with 230 million active credit card numbers in it. So if you've been to the UK and you've used your card 3 times, I've got your number. So it becomes a real issue. And as such, in reality, they're just two sides of the same coin. Either you're working to protect the data, or you're not and you're going to get hacked. It really is as simple as that. So why is it good for business? Well, funnily enough, our merchants come to us because we do secure payments. If we were unreliable, we'd be out of business very, 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 very quickly. We are absolutely paranoid. To give you an idea of how quickly we're out of business, when TalkTalk had their data quality incident, we had a briefing for all the people who are what are called technical services owners from the CTO to check that our stuff was up to date in terms of patching. And not only did that, but we had to provide the executive with a briefing pack on what actions we were taking over each of our systems, so that if there was ever an incident, the CEO could stand outside the building comfortably with the cameras in his face. So we really take this as a sort of trust factor key to our business. And it's not sufficient to do just the minimum. It's really, you have to get to a point where it's embedded in your process to do these things. What any industry standard, PCI or any of the others does, is give you a minimum standard sufficiency. You should try and do more. In our case, what we've done is looked at governance and saying, if we can cover a large area for all the different standards, then when a new standard evolves like GDPR, all we're having to do is extend that information to cover the new bit. So we're adding from the 80% that we've already got covered for a new standard to 100%. So we keep augmenting it as part of that approach. And there's 2 ways you can do this. If you think you know a lot about security, you can start with a blank piece of paper and start writing it out. It's okay, it works eventually. Or you can start with a bunch of standards, which is what we did, and say, right, what do we need to do to comply with those? But the important part of complying is that it's not lip service. it's relatively easy to persuade an auditor that you're doing the right thing. It is not easy to do the right thing all the time. So today's Hadoop environments, whoops. Whoa, hitting the wrong buttons. See, it's that exciting in a moment. Today's Hadoop environments are going to be big targets, partially because there are more and more places where people have got them. We've seen all the customers talking about what they're doing with it today. And partially because we set out to bring all the data in the organization into this wonderful thing called a data lake. So if I want to get to secure information, it's a natural target. And one of the problems is how many nodes you've got in a cluster. If you have one, we have a transaction system called WPG. It has an Oracle database. We patch it every month. One big Oracle database, one server, or two servers, actually. My Hadoop clusters are hundreds of nodes. Every one of those ones has to be patched up to that level. You can't affect, because the attack will look for which node is going to be open and exposed. So you're setting out, you're putting a target in the middle of your business. So the other thing to note is PCI, or any other industry standard, doesn't normally certify a product. People say, oh, this product gives you PCI compliance. No, PCI team do not certify products. They certify implementations. So a product, Hortonworks with us, is a critical part of achieving PCI certification for the project. But in itself, Hortonworks or any other product is not sufficient. From an operational point of view, which is what I run, it's really important to have a strong partner in doing this so that they will patch, they will develop, they will understand the regulations. But it is about the implementation which is so critical. Where do we go? 2? No, we'll try that one. It likes to jump 2 ahead. I've basically covered this. This started with our journey. We started with Hortonworks 2.2. So things were more naive. Ranger was new. Apache Atlas was a concept. And data plane wasn't even a twinkle in product management's eyes at that point in time. We're now on 2.6.4, very latest release. Last year, we did 298 upgrades. An upgrade will be either an OS upgrade, a Hortonworks upgrade, a HP upgrade. There. If you think about this operationally, that means that we have to upgrade some part of the cluster every working day and twice on Fridays. My systems engineering team hate me for it, but that's what we need to get to. It's not just about the product, the operational part of it, but it's also about using things like SmartSense. What are the best configuration parameters? How do we get to those components? We have trained every one of our team, whether they are project manager, business analyst, developer, systems engineer, to do OWASP, the Open Web Application Security, so that we don't have SQL injection attacks. And we contribute to the Center for Internet Security to look at the latest standards that are evolving around these things. And to show the scale of risk, I was flipping through stuff. You know how it is. You turn up at a conference, you've got to do your slides at the last minute. So late last night, I was looking for some new security ideas. Here's a great one. This is news from Digital Trends. A casino in Las Vegas has been hacked. The route into attacking that was through the fish tank in reception. Okay? Actually, PCI standards help us deal with that. They genuinely help us. But what it was it was a hardware device with a micro Linux kernel on it with a 64 gig SD card, and they could dump the data out to the fish tank and then export it from there over the Wi-Fi. So this is the problem with starting with a blank piece of paper. You are trying to manage this at that scale of a problem. So here's the set of requirements. The PCI 3.2, downloaded off the website, 12 requirements. They're quite broad. They don't actually say turn a firewall on or ban that point. They say things like build and maintain a secure network in the system. Okay, how do you want me to do that? Oh, we're not telling you how to do that. You have to build that. So that means install and maintain a firewall configuration to protect the copy holder, card holder data. Don't use vendor-supplied parameters. Oh, that means changing every port and every password that comes in the default configuration. Because if well-known ports are used and well-known passwords, and Oracle days got Tiger, but admin or guest password, these are all roots of vectors of attack. And we can go through these. The next 2 slides actually go through these in a bit more detail, but what you get is this. And this is color-coded, because we thought it'd be nice to do a BI type thing with color coding. So the red things are totally within WorldPay's power. Hortonworks has nothing to do with them. They are our network configuration, how we build it. They are our internal comms, routing and things. The green things on here are the things that Hortonworks have contributed to us. So we've actually been able to use Knox, Ambari to do things, Atlas, and that's been a long and brave battle. There's somebody in the back, Laura, who's one of our governance team, who wrote a hugely comprehensive document which we handed to Hortonworks to their horror, which said these are all the things that you need to do to help us get to PCI compliance. The fact is, it's there for you now. It's in 264, it's there and it does it. File system encryption on HDFS. And then all the blue things where we had to buy another product to do it. That's interesting, because from an operational point of view, in order to get to that point, having more than one product means more than one set of patching, integration, testing, all the rest of it. So looking for a partner to build a platform, you want to have as much of this, either, in our case, red or green, and as little as possible in a different color. And out of that one, you get down to this. More and more bits of red, but all the vulnerabilities that we have patched with it. So here's an interesting story of a current vulnerability. Until Hortonworks goes to Hortonworks 3.0, the Jetty version in 3 of the products will have open vulnerabilities. In order to deal with PCI compliance, I have to mitigate access to those components of Hadoop which use that Jetty library. That's the sort of level that you're having to think about to get PCI compliance at this sort of scale. And the last set of this, I'm just conscious of time, is addressing the rest of the requirements. We're now down to 7, 8, and 9, which are Kerberizing, more about range AD access. So when you log into our servers, it's no big secret, you go into our offices, you can connect to a public network we have. There's desktop machines. From there, you connect to our working desktop, which has got Word, email, all of those things, via a virtual machine. From there, if you are in the administrative group, you can then get onto our back-end cluster, onto our server network. And from there, you can then connect to another VM, each of which is firewalled progressively with different antivirus, all these sorts of things, to be able to get into these there. And that stops things like the fish tank attack, because the public Wi-Fi is not connected to anything which can actually move up to the next level. So you don't have cut and paste between different layers of virtualization, all of these sorts of things. Kerberizing, what else have we got there? Restrict access. Range is really important, and tagging comes into it. One of the big evolutions that we're moving towards is we're moving away from our ABAC role-based authentication. You can see this table. To, as Atlas matures, we're moving rapidly towards tag-based, where we say this column contains PCI data, therefore you can see that column, but you can only, if you're individual A, you can see it in clear text. If you're individual B, you can see that masked. If you're individual C, you can't see that the column even exists. And we use, so those sorts of rules are implemented by tags integrated with Ranger policies. And this is that sort of thinking about what data it is. Our objective from the outset of building the cluster was to build something we called a secure operational cluster. That meant that we should be able to grant anybody access in the organization to the cluster and have trust in that data being available. So this is why we've gone to this level of extreme to how we manage that data. It also helps, for example, with doing this because we have to understand where all the data comes from, and magically that starts to fulfill our GDPR requirements because we've had to do lineage. So new regulations come in, but because we're already taking a fundamental approach to doing security on the cluster, we're fairly well guaranteed to be able to get to the components that we want to do. We finally get to 9, 10, and 11, and as you can see again, we have pen tests and all the other things that we'll be able to do. Nothing in the description on the left-hand side isn't public. These ones, just examples of what we do. So what does that mean? Well, for us, the first thing is across the top. We need to be at the latest level of Hortonworks. And every time this, what they call the asparagus diagram comes out, I grab this slide, give it to my systems engineering, and saying, you're one line too low. You've got 4 weeks. They actually have officially 30 days inside our internal policy to upgrade it. But I need you to be patching to that latest level. And in addition to that, we then start looking across there. Atlas, Ambari, Knox, and Ranger. These are the tools that we implement with our governance and our systems engineering team to protect it so that we can get that level. Now, by taking all of that technology and combining it with our process, our governance team, our security teams, we can then build a solution which we can every year reset. It's a 12-month cycle as well. So we're just finishing our certification for 2018. Should finish it in the next week or so. The project plan for the team starts in September 2018 to do our 2019 one, which will be renewed in April 2019. Now, that means that this is where you can't fool the auditors. You can get away with it once, but you have to be constantly on top of this. You have to constantly patch. You have to constantly check your documentation, do all the other components in order to get that. So the more tooling you have, and the better processes, and the more culturally embedding it into what you want to do, the faster, easier it is to do those audits, the more control you have over the systems. And with that, it's my great pleasure to hand this over, almost on time for 20 minutes, which is remarkable for me, to Shrikant, so you can talk about how they have worked with us and give you some demos of some of the components and features that are in the system.
Thanks, David. So David kind of set us up nicely to talk through the journey of how they had leveraged our platform and how they've helped push some of the capabilities. What we thought would be good to kind of give you the other side of is you saw all those 12 items with different things on the table around each of the different components. So it'd be good to kind of take a look back and figure out what have we built in those that has helped WorldPay leverage that in this environment. So let's talk through the first one, which is Knox. So Apache Knox is a project we incubated several years ago. It's a top-level project within Apache, and it is providing 3 key services. There's a proxying service, so it is the only trusted proxy that you have for Knox, for all of the Hadoop services. And what that means is that you can do dispatches to any of the services, either via REST APIs, or you can also do web UI flows such as SSO to secure your clusters. So you can shed your SSL, for example, at the perimeter. You can abstract Kerberos from your end users through some of these services that you provide. Authentication services, both for REST and for web SSO flows, and then integrations with LDAP, AD, other corporate infrastructure. Very key pieces that David mentioned in terms of providing that secure perimeter as a gateway for both the APIs as well as other RESTful services, and well integrated with other enterprise tech around SAML, OAuth, support a variety of authentication schemes, and we are constantly adding things to that. For example, we added SSO in HTTP 2.5. We made that better. Now we're going to have platform-wide SSO for all of the components coming out in HTTP 3, and we're also looking at other identity federation mechanisms such as pre-authenticated headers, token-based services, etc. Then what's also recent is the notion of an SDK or a domain-specific language, so you can do client-side scripting and have a nice developer-oriented interface for packaging all of that up for consumption. So very key part of our technology. It's one of a kind within the Apache space. I don't believe any of the other distributions actually have anything even close to this. David also mentioned that Kerberos is a critical part of that security, and the reason why it is that is the only proven strong authentication method that you have where the credentials are not passed over the wire. And in fact, the first implementation of this was by one of our founders, Owen O'Malley, and at that time and even today, it's the best way to handle this at scale. So meaning you can establish your identity for clients, hosts, services. You can prevent any kind of impersonation and avoid any movement of passwords over the wire, as well as provide detailed auditing. So for all of these purposes, the foundation for security in Hadoop is Kerberos. So if you don't have Kerberos, then you can impersonate pretty much any service and any individual, so you run the risk of that. So the first thing that we recommend is Kerberize your clusters before you think about anything else beyond that. Then we've constantly made this journey a little bit easier. Kerberos is complex in terms of implementation, and each of your services require their own key tabs. Users require their own key tabs. For access, there's a key distribution center, a lot of pieces of infrastructure that go with it. So over the years, we've kind of made this easier with every single release. So for example, today in Ambari, you can do a whole bunch of things in a wizard-driven manner. For example, if you want to move your services, you want to regenerate your key tabs, you want to add or delete components, add services, etc. All of those areas, Ambari provides you support automatically. So there's a nice wizard-driven interface. You go through it, and you're done. It'll run, take care of creating the right principles, distributing the right place, putting the key tabs in the right places for those, making sure that all the realms are all lined up and all of that. So it takes a lot of the manual process out of this. And as David mentioned, if you have like a multiple hundreds of nodes, imagine doing this without some kind of a centralized orchestration interface to do that. So it's going to be next to impossible, although we do have some customers who have done it on their own. So that's the first piece, which is Kerberizing, and then we also talked about the perimeter around how you can secure the gateway through either via RESTful API access or for your UIs for single sign-on and authentication federation. The next piece is authorization, which is Ranger. So three key things that Ranger provides, what we call the three pillars here. The first one is authorization, which means this is the centralized platform for your access control and security policies for access to any service. So there's a wide platform, wide and comprehensive and centralized authorization policy. So what that means is the coverage of this is growing as we add more components into the stack. So we recently added NiFi and Atlas and Solar, Kafka. All of these have been growing over time. So there are very few components that are not authorized at this point, and which are probably for a good reason, because either in the process of being retired or they're not pertinent for this context. So the model for Ranger has been designed to be extensible, and we've made this in a fashion that it's extensible and scalable also. So you can do this at scale for other purposes. So we have, for example, some of our partners who have built Ranger authorization models. Microsoft has built one for WASP. In fact, in their HD Insights offering, the only way to authorize is via Ranger. They don't even have file system ACLs on the WASP equivalents. There's also EMC, which has built plugins for Ranger to authorize their Isilon file system, and then Pivotal has taken Ranger and extended that for their Hawk infrastructure. So we're seeing more and more applications of taking this not only to Hadoop ecosystem and friends, but well beyond that to have a general purpose authorization engine that is flexible and scalable. The middle pillar is the key management service. So this supports the transparent data encryption. So we can do both key escrow into a database. The Hadoop KMS at the API level was written as a file and local key management, so it doesn't come with any robustness that you would get with a database and encryption around that. And we also added the capability to escrow those out into a hardware security module if you have those requirements. In particular, we support SafeNet, the Luna line of appliances. The third pillar there, which is critical, is auditing. So it is the centralized source of non-repeatable audits in the platform. And as we've built this platform, we made sure that it scales with the as you scale your clusters, which means the audit's authoritative source is written back to HDFS. It can go with your cluster, and the most recent 90 days worth of data is indexed and available via real-time interface that we provide within Ranger. So that's Ranger in sort of a nutshell. What makes Ranger shine is this one slide. So if there's anything that you guys should take away from this presentation, this is one of the key things. So Ranger is based on an ABAC model, attribute-based access control. What that means is that you can use a combination of the resource you're trying to access, the subject, the user who's trying to access that, and the environment in which this request is coming in to define very fine-grained policies and affect security controls around this. There is a NIST standard 800-162 that speaks to this, and NIST also recommends that you use ABAC over RBAC, which is the role-based access control models. Because of this model, you're able to do very fine-grained, nuanced policies that say things like, do not allow my offshore team access to this data outside of their business hours. So you're not only looking at who the subject is who's making the request, what they're trying to access, but also the context, which is the time of the request coming in, and also what IP address or geolocation that this is coming from. Ranger also has other data protection and security components. So these are primarily around dynamic row filtering and column masking. Let's see if this moves. Okay, there we go. So here's a use case where we have two different users and two different geos. We have different security policies for them. These are dynamically enforced, meaning that as these guys are querying a Hive table which has commingled data, the US folks are only allowed to see the row slice that corresponds to US, and the EU folks can only see the EU rows. Additionally, the analysts are not allowed to see the data in the original form. It has to be anonymized or pseudonymized suitably, so we can see that there are some policies that are applied there that mask your national IDs, credit card numbers, etc. So all of this is built in, so it's available as of, I think, HTTP 2.5. It's fairly stable. We have quite a few customers who will kind of leverage this at scale to run masking and tag and row filtering policies. So let's shift gears a little bit. David also talked about data protection, encryption, etc. So we have quite a few things in this space. So starting at the bottom, we have data protection at the storage level, which is TDE, and then we have in transit, we can do encryptions, and you can also apply restrictions on access, which we saw with Ranger. So this is, I'm going to skip over this. There's a lot of detail here. This is how TDE works. This slide will be available for folks to look at. And then we also talked about the key escrow. So the keys can be, master keys can be put in a hardware security module. In this case, this is going into the KMS. You see that the key management service also offers policy-based control, so you can set up encryption zones and make sure that you encrypt with the right keys, and the master keys now go into the Luna appliance on the left there. Okay, let's very quickly touch upon Atlas. So the vision for Atlas is to provide open metadata and governance services, and that gives you the full capability to understand your data through the metadata, provides open connectors, enables you to do some discovery annotations, etc. Also enables collaboration through other workflows, and also provides you schema for automated governance processes, schema audits, as well as other classification-based controls. So that's other value props here, so around open frameworks, secure collaboration, and reducing operational costs and getting value out of the data. So this is a key picture here. So the Hortonworks stacks offers probably the industry first and the only implementation of classification-based policies. This is where, as David mentioned, let's say you've got a discovery tool that goes and tags 10,000 columns out of your million columns that you have in across Hive tables in Hadoop with having PCI data of certain type. And then you can apply a single policy, single Ranger policy to that whole context to say anything that's classified as PII, apply this kind of security policy, provide this type of access. Ours is the only stack that offers this today, and I don't believe any big data system has anything even close in terms of a classification depth and integration with the security services on the back end. So it's one type of policy. The other type that we provide out of the box with Ranger is prohibition, where you can prevent toxic joins from happening. Time and location we already talked about. These are primarily to do with that use case where we talked about not being able to allow, not allowing your offshore team to be able to access data outside of their business hours. So I'm going to shift very quickly into a quick walkthrough of some of the stuff that we talked about here. All right, let's show you very briefly. So let's start with Atlas. So Atlas at the core is a metadata catalog. So what do you do in a catalog is search to start with. So let's say we want to find all the Hive tables. There's all the list of things here. Oh. Let's see if I can get out of there. Yeah. All right. Okay, so we've searched, we found all the tables in this environment. Then let's say I'm interested in this table. So you can look at the details of the table. There's full lineage that shows up. So you can see that this was created from HDFS, and there's a command that was used. So you can actually see the chain of custody. And then we also have other information, such as other technical metadata. So what are the columns in there? What are some of the creation times? Who the owner is? What database does it live in? We can apply classifications. There's very detailed metadata audits. Every single change to every single entity that's here is audited. So this is very useful to prove to your compliance folks what happened in terms of the metadata change. And then we can also show you the latest state of the metadata as of that change. We also can apply classifications. So those are called tags here in Atlas. And then there's also the presentation of schema. In this case, it's a table, so you can look at columns. And if there's column level lineage available, that will show up here. So I'll show you one example where we do have column level lineage. And this becomes important for the use cases that David mentioned around chain of custody and showing to your auditors where this data came from, what path did it go through to arrive in this current state. So here's the lineage for this particular table. This is a insurance provider summary table. So it was created from this source in HDFS using this SQL, and then somebody derived a view from this. So you can see here not only your upstream path, which is what are all the gyrations that the data went through to land in this current state. You can also see what the downstream path is, which is the impact. If you touch this data set, what happens to all the other things that are downstream of this. Atlas also allows you to do classifications. Here's some examples. In this case, is a banking and insurance use case, so they've got tags that are very specific to that domain. You also have other security-related tags, such as PII, and when you click on a tag, you can see all the associations. Adding a tag is very simple. You can go to an entity. So let's say I want to go here and add a tag. You're presented with a list of all the available tags in the system. You can choose whichever one you want. Tags can also have attributes, and these are very important for writing the security policies or doing other lifecycle type of operations. One example here that we have is what is called expires on. So here's a use case where you have a lease data asset, and then that needs to expire in terms of the access to that particular asset in your data lake across your user base. So in this case, we can write a policy that says in Ranger, whenever you see a tag called expires on, do not allow it to be accessed beyond its expiration date. And the way we annotate that is through attributes on a tag. And you can see here that on this table, the tax 2009 table, we typically keep the tax data for 7 years, let's say, so that expires already on 2016, last day of 2016. So very simple capabilities here around searching for metadata, understanding that visually, lineage, impact, other types of analysis here, and then classification, which we'll look at here in terms of tagging. So all very foundational elements that help customers like WorldPay build robust, scalable governance infrastructure, and also marry that up with the security that you need on the back end. Let's very quickly run through Ranger. So this is the Ranger. I'm going to make that a bit bigger so people can read it. So each of these is a service, and each service can have its own policies. In this case, I only have policies for Hive. So there are 3 types of policies. There are access policies, masking policies, and row filtering policies. Masking policies give you dynamic column level masking, And then the row filter policies give you ability to filter out specific rows based on different conditions. So authoring the policies is very simple. It's a visual interface. You can go in, choose the context, which table or column or database that you want to protect. You can set the users and groups, and you can set very granular permissions on what actions do you want to lock down to which users. And you also have the ability to say it's a positive permissioning, which is allow, or a negative permissioning, which is deny. By default, if you don't have a policy, it's considered as a deny. So by default, it's secure. So unless a policy explicitly gives you access to a resource, you are never granted access to the resource. So by default, we've turned this on. You can also have other exceptions placed here. So for example, you want to say, I want to allow all my US employees, everybody in this US employees AD group, access to this, but I want to exclude the subgroup from this access. Maybe there's an intern subgroup there, which you want to prevent access for this particular asset. So that's an example of a resource-based policy. We also have masking policies that we talked about briefly. Those are very simple. You can go pick the column that you want, and you can pick that type of masking that you want. We offer out-of-the-box options, and there's also a custom option. Custom option is one of the most robust ones where you can just apply any Hive 2 UDF that returns the same type as the column, and you can have your own flexible way to mask the data if you don't find one that works out of the box. So here's an example of that. So there's a custom masking function here that applies, takes the year of birth and prepends 0101 so that you mask the actual birth date, but you can still do demographic analysis and segmentation because the year of birth is provided there. Ranger also has very deep audits. So there are both access audits, so every single access to every single service that Ranger authorizes is logged with a lot of rich event metadata that you see here. The most recent 90 days is indexed via Solar and available through this. The long-term storage HDFS, so a copy of that is always written to HDFS, so you can keep this forever. You can keep it for 7 years, or you can pipe that to other CM systems if you want to. Lots of flexibility in terms of how you want to handle that. So in this case, what you're seeing here is an audit record for each access, whether it was granted or not, with metadata on what are the policies, what is the actual version of the policy in existence at the point that this access event happened. There's also other things around, let's say there's a classification applied to this object. Maybe there is a column that you tried to access that was classified as PII. The PII tag will show up here. And then you will also see other information such as what is the actual object that was accessed, who is the user, what IP, and so on. Ranger also has very deep self-audits, which means every single change you make is audited, so you can see what the state before and after was. So in this case, here's a new policy that was created, so the state after that. Ranger also logs every session, so every single user, when they do anything in Ranger, that's logged here. When the policies got synced to the plugins that enforce the policies locally, you can get information on that and the most current state of policies. Ranger can also be set up to sync to your LDAP and AD, bring in users and groups. These are all groups that are coming in from an external source that's been synced up. And then this can be automated. You can set it to an interval. And we also handle other complexities such as nested LDAP groups and multiple PAM kind of authentication for bringing these things in. So lots of very rich capabilities around just managing authorizations and audits, and also key management service, which we saw in the other screenshots for this. Let's go back to the slides for 1 second. Wrap up here. Oops, I think I closed my...
I think the next couple of slides is say thank you. So it's been a journey for us, I have to say. This has not been something that we did overnight. We started on the journey knowing that there was no platform that could do this. We've had to go through a mutual process of discovery to get to that point. But the advantage of working with somebody to get this done means that for a lot of organizations taking this on board now, they'll see it out of the box and think, what was all the fuss about? I think internally, I'm still having to justify what all the fuss was about because it took us a long time to get there and deal with it. But it's been a worthwhile journey. Our partnership is close. We have a monthly call. We get everybody on the call between the organizations to look at what needs to be done for security. We'll keep doing that. It's in our interest to move it up to PCI DSS version 3.2, 3.3, 4 when it comes along. We're looking at GDPR regulations. We're looking at all the other richness that goes into the product. It's important to collaborate with community people. So I noticed up there we put the SafeNet Luna. The reason for HSM, the reason that was the first one that was put up there was that's our default vendor for HSM. So there's a sort of small correlation in that, that factor. And security fixes. Our pen test team actually go through and we get lists of things which we find in the code like that Jetty library's expired, can you get it updated? I was talking yesterday with Jamie Youngs, the product manager, and he was saying what a challenge that is. Because if you have got a piece of code which is using something like a Jetty library, and it's embedded in core Apache product, you've got to persuade a whole bunch of people that it's worth doing this one, who may have absolutely zero interest in patching it, because it's an old piece of code they wrote a while ago. And what we're now moving on to is starting to look at the next generation, the next layer on top of this, of things like data plane and how they're going to expand it. And I think our journey will be as interesting and challenging as it was before, but I'm sure we're all on board for that.
All right. Just a couple of points I wanted to add to what Dave mentioned. So the result of our collaboration here, we've actually begun a very, very systematic process for every platform release. We go through, security at the source code level. So we have source scans, we have dependent library scans, the kind of scans that unearth the problems that Equifax had, where they had dependent libraries that had vulnerabilities that were not patched. And the third is, of course, pen testing, which we go through as a, not only as part of the platform, but also as a third-party certification process. And then we are very closely working with customers to be able to leverage these things and provide these patches on top. So sometimes these patches come in first from Hortonworks, and then they go to the community, because we want to make sure that our customers are secure from the, as soon as these are known, even if it's a zero-day exploit, for example. And as David mentioned, some of the key learnings from all of this security journey with WorldPay has given us a lot of requirements and a lot of things that we need to build into data plane. And you will see some of that surface tomorrow in the keynote. So we're doing a keynote on the Data Steward Studio. So please, we welcome you all to come and give us feedback on that. And we will also be double-clicking into the Data Steward Studio offering tomorrow in a subsequent session in the afternoon. So thank you all for your attention.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be around now for the next hour if anybody's got any questions they want to ask. And I know all of the Hortonworks team will be there to support anybody who wants to ask some questions. But thank you very much.
Thank you.